Final Exam, an Avatar The Last Airbender fanfiction. Chapter 15.
A trickle of sweat coursed down her spine, and Shiori shifted her shoulder blades with discomfort. She was in a valley far beneath the canopy where the cooling sea breeze played. The languid air was laden with moisture. It lay thick and heavy in her lungs with every breath. It was almost enough to make her wish for the cool nighttime mist or a set of gills.
The Yuyan do not complain.
She squinted upwards through the latest work of greenery, trying to gauge the hours of daylight remaining. It was about midday, judging by the sun. The peak of heat had yet to hit. Shrugging her shoulders slightly, the 14-year-old decided it was time for a break. She snagged a nearby vine and shimmied into the relative safety of a tree. There, she pulled off her quiver and rested her bow on her lap, as her back was cooled by the thick, mossy trunk. She scanned her surroundings out of habit, the thick vegetation limiting her view. Misty Island was a lush paradise. Plants seemed to grow everywhere, climbing on top of each other to reach the sunlight. In most places, the trees were so intertwined that there was no need for one's feet to touch the ground. Shiori had never imagined so many shades of green existed, from the blue-green of the moss that covered many of the rocks on the forest floor to the bright yellowish-green flowers adorning the tallest trees. This world was painted in a rich palette of color. The amount of wildlife was also astounding. Flocks of brightly colored reptile parrots made their presence known with raucous conversations. Pygmy leopard monkeys and their far fiercer cousins, the purple-maned gorillas, made their homes amongst the trees and on the forest floor. On the ground, she had spotted the tracks of a saber-toothed lion moose and those of a herd of Komodo deer. An incident with a porcupine boar made her leery of remaining on the ground too long. Countless insects, large and small, swarmed in droves about the forest. Shiori had ceased attempting to sleep at night after something very large and with far too many legs had crawled over one of her arms. Now she traveled at night, looking for telltale campfires and took cat naps during the heat of day. In a way, she loved it here. A far cry from the confines of Zuko's ship or even Symmetra Island, this place allowed her to use every inch of her body and her training to its fullest potential. The endless days of calisthenics, obstacle courses, and runs through the forest were no longer the boring training exercises that she had to do. Now she could appreciate the skills each task had given her. Truly, this was a place where she could be Yuyan, living every aspect of the life that entailed. Sadly, if the fabled avatar did not make an appearance soon, she feared it might be her first and last outing as such. Shiori idly scratched at one of the many insect bites that adorned her hand. 3 days of hunting and not an airbender to be found. It was borderline depressing. She wondered how Prince Zuko was faring. He and his men had split into 3 groups upon arrival. The area of the manta ray bat's breeding grounds was quite large. The plan was for one group to head west, one to search the eastern edge, and for Prince Zuko's team to go straight up the middle. Shiori, although only 14, was given the daunting task of making her way to the far northern edge of the territory as fast as she was able to search for the avatar there. She had been pleased by the challenge, easily outdistancing her soldier counterparts for the first night. Shiori had not seen any sign of human life since, even though she kept a constant eye out for her elder brethren. They were here somewhere, full-fledged Yuyan, the best archers in the world. Just the thought made her smile. The teen closed her eyes, surrendering to the warmth of the day, reminding her that she'd have to do something hunting later. Unlike Zuko's firebender, Shiori traveled light, carrying only her archery equipment, 2 spark rocks, and a small canteen and a few medicinal supplies. In a place this rich with food, this was all she required. Gradually she nodded off, senses tuned to the thrum of life around her. Shiori woke up abruptly, knowing without a doubt that something was off in the environment around her. She remained still, scanning the area, listening for any out-of-place noises. The forest was unusually quiet. Then she heard it. A deep, low rumbling sound, punctuated by crashing noises coming from somewhere off to her left. Shiori frowned, standing up and shutting her eyes as she squinted in that direction. She saw nothing, but a flock of reptile parrots took wing from an area not too far away. It seemed worth investigating, at any rate. Slipping her quiver and bow back on, the young trainee slid down a thick vine to the ground. She paused, orienting herself, and then heading out. In this overgrown area of the island, speed took a backseat to caution out of necessity. The forest floor was a tangled mess of plant life. Moss and moisture made rocks treacherous footing, and thick tree roots sought to trip up the unwary traveler. Shiori found an animal trail headed in the direction she wished to go and made her way towards the disturbance as fast as she was able. The low, rumbling groan came again, causing Shiori to speed up slightly. She leaped nimbly over one of the many small streams that crisscrossed the forest floor, trickling towards the ocean from the top of the dominant volcano range that made up the sheltering northern ridge of the island. The vegetation became sparser, allowing Shiori to speed up. The groaning ceased, but the crashing noises intensified. Having learned the wisdom of caution on Symmetra, where instructors habitually put arrows through the clothing of careless students, Shiori took to the trees as she neared the source of the disturbance. Creeping through the canopy, she soon had a bird's eye view of something unexpected. A large crocodile python was tearing apart a carcass of some unfortunate beast, death rolling to tear off chunks of meat and then distending its jaw to swallow the pieces whole. It was fascinating and sickening all at once. Oddly enough, it appeared as if the dead beast had been deceased for a while, or else the crocodile python was a faster eater than it was currently demonstrating, which made her wonder how the thing had managed to utter that rumbling groan for so long. Shiori watched nature in action for a bit, then shook her head with a sigh. Wiping the sweat streaming down her face with the back of her hand, the girl turned away from the gruesome spectacle. All that expended energy for nothing. What a disappointment. She made her way back to the stream, pausing to wash the evidence of her exertion off her face. Taking off her omnipresent red headband, she scrubbed it against a rock before refastening it about her brow. She remained, crouched by the water's edge, watching the light dance off its fast-moving surface. Capture the Avatar. It seemed like such a nice specific goal, and yet she found the quest to be nebulous at best. If the Avatar came, if he arrived in her designated hunting zone, if she was not beaten to the prize by her fully trained elders or Zuko's men. And worst of all, time was running out. Master Zoran had lent her to Prince Zuko for a month. General Iroh had already dispatched a messenger hawk arranging the day and location of her transfer back. Avatar or no Avatar, she and Prince Zuko had to depart Misty Island in 4 more days.
Which is why I should not waste any more time.
Shiori rose from her crouched position. Thus far, her search had been fruitless. Maybe if she headed farther north, up the mountains a little, maybe get high enough to spot the Avatar's flying bison, or smoke from a campfire, or something to indicate the Airbender's presence, then maybe she'd make her deadline. It was as good of a plan as any. Shiori rubbed her wet hands dry on her pants and started to follow the stream against its flow, wading in the shallow water to avoid the crowd of vegetation that grew on its bank. Hunger pangs hit her again. Shiori had been surviving on a handful of berries here, a raw egg there, and nibbles on the chunk of hard tack bread that Chef Lee had pressed into her hand before her departure. Protein, she knew, was vital, but it took time to hunt, dress, and cook a meal. Before, she had been so impatient just to get here and then to start her quest that the idea of wasting time on anything other than that had been unthinkable. Now that a few days have passed, though, a well-cooked meal was moving up on her list of priorities. It was a rookie's mistake, she knew, to value anything above survival, even if that anything was her entire future. Wading upstream, Shiori kept an arrow loosely nocked, keeping an eye out for an unwary, thirsty beast. A slight rustle to her left was her only warning. Something small and furry jumped out of a tree and landed on her shoulder. Sharp claws easily pierced through her clothes and into the tender flesh below, the unexpected weight throwing her off balance. The instant pain made it difficult to think. She spun in a circle, soaking her pants with her frantic splashing, then used her arrow to strike at the creature. It leaped nimbly aside, landing vertically on a nearby tree trunk. Orange-brown in color and covered in striking black stripes, the tiger squirrel growled at her, large poofy tail twitching in irritation. Shiori's lips pulled back in imitation, her arrow already drawn back to her cheek. The little predator gave up its posturing. Scurrying to the opposite side of the tree, it began to climb upwards. The girl tried to out-circle the beast, but it was much too quick, so she stood quietly in the creek bed, patiently waiting. Sure enough, once it had reached an acceptable height, the little imp couldn't resist stalking out of a tree branch to growl at her one last time. Shiori almost felt guilty about killing it, but she was hungry and her shot was clean. The tiger squirrel fell from its perch, dead before it hit the ground. As she collected her soon-to-be meal, she heard another rustle and another. Glancing around her, she saw flashes of orange and black through the greenery. Tucking her catch into her shirt, the archer quickly drew another arrow. She backed into the waterway. The sound of movement through the canopy seemed to come from all sides. Another tiger squirrel, this one much larger, stalked boldly out from behind a tree, poofy tail jerking in time with each low-pitched growl. Shiori realized her mistake as soon as she saw the size of the beast. The one she had killed had obviously been a yearling, still learning how to hunt and still under its mother's protection. That explained why it had pounced on her, a being far too large for it to take down. Inexperience. Mom, on the other hand, had fangs that protruded well beyond the confines of her mouth, making her an actual threat. Other flashes of color meant that the one she had slain hadn't been an only child. Shiori kept her arrow trained on the predator's throat.
Sorry, but I have to eat too.
The tiger squirrel began to crouch. Shiori adjusted her aim, purposely just nicking the enraged predator's front leg. Snarling, the beast sprang 10 feet into the air, landing on a branch. Without a pause, it leaped from branch to branch, with an agility and grace that made the young Yu-Yong jealous. 2 cubs followed after their mother's retreat. Shiori lowered her bow, letting out a sigh of air at the same time. Gradually, she came back to herself, becoming distinctly aware that she had a furry, bloody corpse down the front of her shirt. Insects, already attracted by the blood, swarmed around her head. Removing both her dinner and her shirt, Shiori washed the red, sticky fluid off in the stream. The cool water felt good against her skin and soothed the claw marks on her shoulder, although she knew she would regret washing the shirt if she did not dry before nightfall. After inspecting her shoulder and finding the wounds irritating but not worthy of treatment, Shiori wrung out and replaced her shirt, and gathered up her prey and the arrow. The wet archer continued upstream, this time keeping an eye out for a clearing. The girl intended to cook her meal well before dusk when the glow of a fire might attract unwanted attention. Not long later, she found what she was looking for, a large, flat spit of eroded river rocks protruding from one of the banks. The stream was broader here, but shallow, the banks far exceeding the current volume. Shiori made her fire pit right down on the spit. Although still daylight out, her cautious nature applauded the fact that the stream's banks would help her hide her fire from view. Finding dry tinder in the internally damp forest was easier said than done. Shiori had time to mentally lament her lack of fire-bending abilities more than once before her spark rocks finally caught. While her cooking fire slowly grew in size, she gutted and skinned her catch. The amount of meat was about comparable to that of a full-grown skunk rabbit, and without the stink. Before long, she was consuming her first real meal in days. The meat was a bit tough, but Shiori's stomach was happy to see it. She ate slowly, allowing the heat of the fire to dry her clothes somewhat. She had unwittingly relaxed to an unimaginable degree, for the boy's voice caught her completely off guard, so much so that she froze in shock for a second or two.
I'm telling you, Katara, I smell meat. Juicy, succulent cooking meat. And it's coming from this direction. My nose is never wrong.
And I'm telling you that you're crazy. No one is out here, and besides, we're supposed to wait for Aang back at camp. What if he comes back and we're gone?
You worry too much, and Aang won't care. He doesn't even eat meat.
The archer shook herself. People? Here? She hastily began kicking dirt and rocks over her small fire, silently cursing the noise. Shoving the rest of her tire squirrel haunch into her mouth, she wiped the grease off on her pants and went for the nearest suitable tree. Up she climbed, orienting her body to the upwind side of the trunk. She couldn't see the others yet, but judging by the snaps and rustles of disturbed foliage, they wouldn't be out of view for long. A downward glance confirmed her worst fears. The soft riverbank soil was covered in her tracks. It would take a blind man to miss it. She prepared an arrow, not wasting energy to draw it back, but leaving it nocked just the same. Who could this be? Certainly not a Yuyan. Her fellow archers would never be so noisy. Admiral Zhao's soldiers, perhaps? But they sounded so young.
Well, Sokka, where is it?
I can't smell it anymore. But I swear it was coming from around here somewhere.
Why can't you just admit that you were wrong and that this little adventure has been a waste of time?
Because I'm not wrong. I know I smelled cooking meat. And don't talk to me about wasting time. This whole side trip is a huge waste of time. And here's one little rumor about some sort of flying what's-it, and off we go. What happened to their need to get to the North Pole as soon as possible? What happened to no more distractions? Huh?
The boy's exasperated voice rose in pitch dramatically, causing Shiori to drop his age to somewhere younger than Zuko in the teenage spectrum. She could see them now, flashes of blue amongst the green. Their progress had slowed as their conversation intensified, a wellspring of excitement built in the teenage girl. These were the Avatar's companions. They had to be. What luck! She silently gave thanks to every ancestor and spirit she can think of, including to the very young tiger squirrel whose inexperience had led to this fortuitous turn of events. The two Water Tribe teens, brother and sister if she recalled correctly, were standing semi-hidden by a clump of shrubbery-looking trees. Shiori frowned, thinking quickly. Prince Zuko had given her specific orders not to kill the Avatar, but he had been a little vague on his intentions towards these two. She hesitated, and then swiftly switched her arrow from a steel-tipped wedge to a blunted tip. She saw no point in killing if it wasn't necessary, and without clear instructions, it was always better to err on the side of caution. The girl was a waterbender. Incapacitating her would be crucial, especially this close to a stream. Shiori would take her out first, and then her brother. She could see the girl's hands, darker toned than her own pale flesh, as she gestured. But her head remained annoyingly obscured by a tree branch. Shiori eased away from her sheltering trunk, trying to get a better angle without revealing her location. She drew back her arrow. The siblings blithely continued talking.
Sokka, don't you miss home? Sitting around the communal fire eating stewed sea prunes and listening to grand stories?
Seal blubber jerky.
Yes, that too. The point is, we miss home, and we've only been gone a little while. We know it will still be there when we get back. Aang can never go home again. His whole culture is gone. If searching for some giant manta ray bat makes him feel better, what harm is there in letting him have a day or two to look? Besides, we needed supplies, and this place is full of food, even if it doesn't come pre-cooked.
Move your head, move your head.
She had a clear shot on the boy, but didn't want to alert the girl by dropping him first.
Patience. Your chance will come. Be patient and calm.
She forced down the excited part of her that wanted this to be over and done with as soon as possible. Reaching inside for the calm, still center of her being, the place from whence all perfect shots came. Taking out these two before they reached their camp would give her an edge when it came to the Avatar. An edge she would most certainly need when dealing with the powerful Airbender. But she didn't have to do it right this second. The right moment would present itself. It always did. Repeating the mistakes that had nearly cost her dearly during the fourth-year exam would prove that she was not worthy of continuing her training. Her back began to twinge, protesting the prolonged tension. Shiori ignored it. If the girl would only move a little to her left, she she'd have her shot. A high-pitched keen served as her only notice. A flash of movement, her bowstring was severed near the top. Then suddenly, released tension caused her recurved bow to jerk wildly in her hands, smacking into the tree's foliage and nearly escaping her hand. The arrow fell to the ground, rustling and clattering against the branches as it went. The severed string struck her in the face, smarting sharply. She gasped in pain as her barely missed eye started streaming water. Only the fact that she had had an arrow drawn saved her hand. It flew back and down while the string snapped forward.
Hey, did you hear something?
But it was not the boy's voice that caused Shiori to freeze in place. It was the arrow shaft protruding from her tree's trunk, just inches from her head. Still vibrating from impact, the blood-red fletching seemed to shout its sender's warning. Say nothing, do nothing, or you'll be next.
Final Exam was written by Magnusrae. Avatar The Last Airbender is owned by Nickelodeon, Michael Dante DiMartino, and Brian Konietzko. The narrator for this story is Makeya Royer. The voice of Shiori is Lexi Orta. The voice of Sokka is Hylian Knight 97. The voice of Katara is Jocelyn Bouwers. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you next week.